Life has a way of throwing challenges our way, especially when it comes to family dynamics. Emily had always been in the shadow of her older sister, Sarah, who always seemed to get what she wanted. But on her wedding day, Emily decided it was time to take control of her own story. What was supposed to be a peaceful celebration turned into a battle for the spotlight. Today, we dive into a journey of resilience, strategy, and ultimately, self-liberation. Subscribe to the channel to start today's story of love, betrayal, and triumph in life stories. I stood there, my fingers gripping the edge of the vanity, my knuckles turning white as I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The soft glow of the morning light filtered through the window, casting a warm, golden hue across the bridal gown hanging beside me. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. The delicate lace sleeves, the fitted bodice, the flowing train, it was perfect. Today was supposed to be my day. My moment. The day I would finally walk down the aisle, surrounded by the people I loved, to marry the man who meant everything to me. But something felt off, something I couldn't shake, no matter how many times I tried to calm myself down. It wasn't just the usual pre-wedding jitters, it was deeper. Something more profound. I could feel the storm brewing, just beneath the surface, threatening to upend everything I had worked so hard for. And then, there was a soft knock at the door. Emily? I turned toward the sound, my heart already pounding. It was Jake, my fiancé. He peeked his head through the door, his expression unreadable. That wasn't a good sign. Jake was usually an open book, joy, excitement, frustration, whatever it was, he wore it on his face. But today, his face was carefully neutral. I set my brush down, a strange knot tightening in my stomach. What happened? Jake stepped in, closing the door behind him. He sat beside me on the edge of the bed, running a hand over his face, as though trying to gather his thoughts. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw hesitation there. Sarah called me last night, he said slowly. I could feel my stomach twist into a knot, even though I already knew what was coming. She's coming to the wedding, isn't she? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake let out a long, slow breath. Not just coming, she wants to walk down the aisle before you. He paused, in a wedding dress. Silence filled the room, a deafening silence, like a thick fog that settled in my chest, suffocating me. A slow creeping horror seeped into my veins, and for a moment, I thought I might actually laugh. The absurdity of it all was too much to bear. Insulting, really, but at the same time, it felt painfully predictable. This was Sarah, my older sister, the one who always got what she wanted. She had been the golden child of our family for as long as I could remember. If she wanted something, it was hers. If I wanted something, I got whatever was left over. And now she wanted my wedding. My moment. I clenched my jaw, forcing the bitterness down. And Mom and Dad? Jake rubbed a hand over his face again, clearly struggling with this. They're backing her up. They think it's only fair since she's older and hasn't gotten married yet. I could feel the anger rising, the words burning at the back of my throat. Fair. That word had never once worked in my favor. My parents had always played favorites, always pushing Sarah forward while I was left to stand in the shadows. Now, on my wedding day, they were doing the same thing. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. And what did you say? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Jake met my eyes, and for the first time, a slow, almost mischievous smile tugged at his lips. I told them I'd think about it. I furrowed my brows, confused. Think about it? He leaned in closer, his voice low and filled with determination. Emily, we're going to use this to our advantage. I blinked. Jake was many things, kind, loyal, protective, but above all, he was calculating when he needed to be. I had seen it before. In moments when he had dealt with difficult people, whether it was a corrupt landlord or a colleague trying to sabotage him. Jake had a way of turning the tables. Do you really think I'd ever let this happen? He continued, his tone sharp. Do you really think I'd stand by while Sarah turns our wedding into her personal fantasy? My heart raced. Then why not shut it down immediately? I asked, my voice rising in frustration. Because, Jake said, his fingers tapping against the bedpost. If we say no now, they'll just find another way to sabotage us. But if they think they're getting what they want. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Like a promise. We control the game. A shiver ran down my spine. I knew that look. The look of someone setting a trap. I had seen it before when Jake had dealt with difficult situations. The way he thought ahead. The way he always had a plan. It gave me a sense of power I had never felt before. I turned to him, a slow smile creeping across my lips. Tell me the plan. Jake leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. We let them believe they've won. We let Sarah think she'll have her moment. We let our in-laws feel like they're helping by paying for things. He paused, his eyes darkening with resolve. Then, when the day comes, we make sure she never gets the chance to walk down that aisle. For the first time in my life, I felt a rush of vindication, excitement, power. My sister was about to learn what it felt like to lose. As the wedding day drew closer, Jake and I kept our cool, playing our roles to perfection. We had to let Sarah believe she was winning, while all the while, we set our plan into motion. It was a game of patience, strategy, and calculated moves, something I had never been good at, but Jake had mastered over the years. We started by playing along with the idea of Sarah walking down the aisle before me. I pretended to consider it seriously, feigning hesitation when I spoke with my parents. They were thrilled when I said I'd make some compromises for the sake of family peace. Sarah, of course, couldn't contain her excitement. She practically bounced off the walls, as if she had already won. And in that moment, I realized something. Sarah had never really understood what it meant to lose. She had always been the one who got everything, the attention, the praise, the love. I was used to being in her shadow. But now I would make sure she felt it. The next step in our plan was to undermine Sarah's confidence. To make sure she thought she had full control while we quietly shifted the power dynamics. Jake and I started subtly manipulating the situation, setting little traps that would make Sarah feel more entitled to her place in the spotlight. It began with the guest list. My mother, of course, insisted on managing the invitations. The pretense was that she wanted to make things easier for me. But I knew better. She loved control, loved having the final say in everything. Jake and I agreed to let her take the reins. But we made sure she wasn't fully aware of what was happening behind her back. We adjusted the guest list so that Sarah's friends were invited. But some of my closest friends mysteriously didn't make the cut. I had grown accustomed to being sidelined. But I wasn't going to let Sarah do the same to my friends. Jake made a small, but critical move. He subtly mentioned to my mother that I was feeling overwhelmed with the wedding planning. Linda's been so stressed, he told her. She hasn't even had time to double-check the guest list. And just like that, my mother felt that familiar sense of urgency to fix things. Little did she know, Jake had already printed a second set of invitations, sending them out behind her back. By the time my mother realized what had happened, it would be too late. My friends would already be at the wedding, and Sarah's group would be left out in the cold. The next move was the dress situation. Sarah, of course, couldn't resist picking out a dress to wear when she walked down the aisle before me. She was so smug about it, practically gushing with excitement. I already found the perfect dress, she told me one afternoon. It's going to be such a symbolic moment. You know, a blessing from me to you as the older sister. I could feel my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to smile and nod. It was so predictable, so typical of her to try and make everything about herself. But Jake and I had already put a plan in motion to ruin her little fantasy. Sarah's dress order would never be processed. A few days before the wedding, she would get a call from the boutique, informing her that there had been a mix-up and her dress hadn't arrived on time. She would be left scrambling, just as I had been left to pick up the pieces all my life. I didn't say a word to Sarah about the plan. I let her think she had everything under control, just as we had planned. In a way, it almost felt cruel, but in another. It felt necessary. I had spent my whole life being the afterthought. It was time for Sarah to see what it felt like to be ignored. To be denied the one thing she wanted so badly. With every step, I could feel myself growing stronger, more confident. The tension was building, and I was ready for it. The final act was yet to come. And Sarah, completely unaware, was walking straight into the trap. She thought she had won. But the reality was that she was about to lose in a way she could never have imagined. Jake caught my eye, a silent reminder that we were in this together. He squeezed my hand, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. We were finally going to take control of our lives, free from the suffocating grip of my family's expectations. But little did Sarah know, the real game had only just begun. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sense of eerie calmness that I didn't expect. I should have been nervous. Should have felt the familiar tension in my stomach that comes with such an important day. But instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of anticipation. This wasn't just my wedding day, it was the day that Sarah would finally learn what it felt like to lose. And I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction building within me. I wasn't walking into a battlefield, I was walking into freedom. As I sipped my coffee in the bridal suite, the calm before the storm settled over me. I was surrounded by my bridesmaids, chatting quietly, but I could barely focus on their voices. My mind kept returning to what was about to unfold. The plan Jake and I had set into motion was now in full swing. Sarah was walking right into it. And by the time she realized what had happened, it would be too late. Around 9:15 a.m., I received the first sign that things were going wrong for Sarah. My phone vibrated, and I glanced at the screen. It was a text from my mother. I opened it, and a small, wicked smile tugged at my lips. "Emily, we have a huge problem. Sarah's dress is missing. The boutique says it was never ordered." I could barely hold back my amusement. I set the phone down slowly, savoring the moment. Sarah, standing in front of the mirror, her hair half done, would now be in a panic. She had no idea how carefully orchestrated this disaster was. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the moment sink in. As my mother sent message after message, asking me to get involved, I stayed calm. I wasn't going to rush to help her fix a problem that she had created for herself. It was about 10:30 a.m. when Jake received another text. This time from his brother. It was a photo of Sarah's friends standing outside the venue, confused and upset because they hadn't received their invitations. Jake replied casually, "That's so weird. Maybe they got lost in the mail." By now, I knew my mother must have realized something was wrong. The guest list had been tampered with, and Sarah's dress had disappeared into thin air. But they were too busy trying to piece everything together to fully understand what had happened. They had been played, and they still didn't know it. The final blow was about to land. At 12:15 p.m., I received a call from my father. His voice was tense, urgent, but I couldn't help the smile that tugged at my lips as I answered. "What's going on, Dad?" He was frantic. "We have a serious situation. Sarah is at the venue, but they won't let her inside. They're saying she's not on the guest list." I pretended to frown, genuinely acting confused. "What do you mean?" I specifically told the venue that only invited guests should be allowed in. "Maybe her name isn't on the list?" There was a long pause. I could hear my mother's frantic voice in the background, calling the venue, and Sarah, likely screaming in the background as well. My father's voice dropped, barely audible. "You did this." I smiled to myself, not responding immediately. I knew exactly what he was trying to say. It wasn't a question anymore, he knew the truth. But I wasn't going to let him guilt me into doing anything. This was my day, and it had nothing to do with Sarah's tantrum. I broke the silence. "I don't know what you mean, Dad. I've been busy with wedding planning. Maybe you should ask Mom. Fix this now," he ordered, his voice sharp. I let out a small, innocent laugh. "I'm the bride. I don't think I should be dealing with this right now. Do you?" I could hear his frustration building on the other end, but I wasn't backing down. "Goodbye, Dad," I said cheerfully before ending the call. I turned to Jake, who had been listening the entire time. He raised an eyebrow. "She's outside?" he asked, as though waiting for confirmation. I nodded, my heart racing with excitement. Perfect. I wasn't anxious anymore. I wasn't nervous about the ceremony or how everything would turn out. As I stood at the entrance to the chapel, my bouquet in hand, I felt peace wash over me. I was finally free. My guests turned to look at me, and I could hear the whispers, the murmurs of curiosity. They all knew something was wrong, but they didn't know how wrong it had gone for Sarah. The music began to play, and with each step down the aisle, I could feel the weight of the years of being overlooked, of being second to Sarah, lifting from my shoulders. I wasn't walking in anyone's shadow anymore. This was my moment, and I had earned it. As I reached the altar, I caught Jake's eye. His smile, his silent pride, reassured me that everything had gone according to plan. Outside, Sarah was still probably screaming at security, fighting to get inside, but I wasn't going to think about her anymore. I was focused on the man in front of me, the man who had stood by me through every storm. The ceremony unfolded beautifully, and as we exchanged vows, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of triumph. I was finally free, free from the expectations of my parents, free from the shadow of Sarah. And as we were officially pronounced husband and wife, I knew this was just the beginning of my new life, the one where I would no longer have to fight for scraps of love and attention. This was my victory, my moment, and nothing, no one, could take that away from me. As Jake and I made our way to the reception hall, the air was thick with tension. I could feel the weight of the day lifting off my shoulders. But there was still one final act to come. As we entered the hall, I spotted my parents standing near the entrance, their faces stormy with anger. Sarah wasn't there yet, but I knew that once she arrived, the real confrontation would happen. It didn't take long. My mother was the first to approach us, her voice sharp and controlled, though her eyes burned with fury. "You humiliated your sister," she hissed, her anger palpable. But before I could respond, Daniel stepped in with a smirk. "How exactly?" he asked, his voice smooth and confident. "She was outside, crying in front of everyone." The entire room went silent, all eyes turning to my parents as they processed what had happened. My mother's face twisted in disbelief, and my father, for the first time, couldn't find a way to defend Sarah. Then, in the most perfectly timed moment, the doors to the reception hall swung open, and in stormed Sarah, her face smeared with mascara, her eyes swollen from crying, and her clothes a far cry from the wedding attire she had dreamed of. "You," she spat, pointing at me, but I remained calm, a smile tugging at my lips. "Sarah," I said softly, "I wasn't sure you were coming." The moment was surreal. Sarah stood there, humiliated, and I realized for the first time that I had truly won. I had taken back control, and I no longer needed to fight for my place in the family. My parents had seen the truth, and even though they were angry, they knew I had done nothing wrong. I was no longer the afterthought. I was the bride, and this was my day. As the reception continued, filled with whispers and glances, I knew this was the moment I would never forget. The moment I finally stopped living for everyone else and began living for myself. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more life stories and incredible journeys.